Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We have a guest with us today. This is Keith Johnson from Allen Heath. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a product specialist with Allen Heath, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a product specialist looking after compact digital mixers.
Right, and we have the new SQ5 here, right?
Absolutely.
Which is the latest in the family. 16 microphone preamps, 48 channels, 36 mix buses, fully equipped mixer.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, ideal for clubs, for concerts, for church worship situations. So yeah, very cool. We appreciate you coming in today. And one of the reasons I wanted to sit down with you is, there's been a lot of controversy over the past few years about digital mixers because the sample rates keep ramping up, and we're now seeing 96K kind of becoming the standard. And I see a lot of questions on the forums about why 96K matters, or does it even matter? So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about that. Absolutely,
and as you're pointing out, the SQ does have our latest generation XCVI core in it, so it is a 96K mixer.
Right, absolutely. So one of the first things that comes up with 96K is that, we won't get into all the digital theory and everything, but the Nyquist theorem states that you can hear basically, you get basically half the audio bandwidth versus the sample rate. Yeah. So if our sample rate is at 96K, we'd expect a 48K audio bandwidth, and of course we can't hear that high, or human hearing is assumed to be 20 kilohertz. Yeah. Does that even factor into the equation?
It does, because whilst you might not be able to hear those higher frequencies, you can certainly hear their effect on the frequencies you can hear. So again, if we're not jumping into the math of this, but you've got anti-aliasing filters, and they have to be very steep to stop smearing in the top end and stop basically messing around with those higher frequencies that you can hear. So going up to 96K kind of just bypasses that problem.
It basically moves it out of the range of human hearing.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're not going to be affected.
And so for years, I've well, not for years, but ever since it's basically become commonly available, I've done all my studio work at 96K, and one of the reasons was basically just to allow for that maximum bandwidth, but also because with virtual synthesizers and with plugins and processors, it does make a difference, I think, in the sound quality. Is the same true with live sound?
Absolutely. So, yes, if you're in a club and you're running a much lower sample rate, some people might not necessarily notice it, but when you're looking at the studio side of things, people are sat there and they are noticing the difference. So there is a difference there, and the people who will notice it live as well.
Right.
So it's coming from the studio side of things and moving into the live arena.
Right. So what are the specific things you're going to notice? Are we talking about transient response? Are we talking about stereo imaging? Are we just talking about hearing high notes better? Or what are we talking about?
The human hearing, you hear directionally much more accurately at the higher frequencies. At low frequency, you're not going to tell where it's coming from. So, one of the things with 96K, with those much better high ends and much clearer high ends, means that you have much better stereo imaging. So that's one of the benefits. And you mentioned transient response there. The transient response is much better as well. So you're especially going to notice that on things like drums, for example.
Okay.
Then another benefit of this 96K is when it comes to digital mixing is all digital mixers have latency. That's just how it is.
Sure.
You've got to have processing time. With SQ, we've got that latency down to below 0.7 milliseconds because of the 96K.
Right.
That's one of the byproducts of.
So latency drops as sample rate goes up.
Yep.
Because it's a given number of samples that are actually required for the processing. So at a higher rate.
Exactly.
Goes by faster.
Exactly, and then that has benefits further down the chain because you've got lower latency. You're using that with other products which may also have latency. So you're trying to keep all that latency as low as possible.
Right.
So kind of instance.
Right. In particular, when you're using in-ear monitors, because the response is so quick.
Exactly.
Because when you're talking about a millisecond, I mean, how far is that? It's about a foot, right? In terms of the air travel, coming from a floor monitor or something, but with an in-ear monitor.
And especially with vocalists or guitar players or people like that really picking up on those transients, but also the time difference, they will notice it. And it sounds natural with this. With some systems, if that latency is too long, you start to become detached from what's going on around you, which is kind of the opposite of what you want from an in-ear monitor system.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had the experience very early on with a very early digital mixer of playing live with that, and the latency was so noticeable that I found myself actually straining my voice because I was trying to compensate by singing louder to make up for not hearing it immediately.
And then in the end, you pull them off and just...
Yeah, right, exactly. And obviously with something like this, it's essentially real time. I mean, we're so close to real time anyway.
Yeah.
Now, does it change things when we start inserting EQs and processing and things inside the mixer?
With the XCVI core and the deep processing, no, there's no, that stays fixed. For our philosophy is to keep that fixed, and you've got everything aligned all the time.
Right.
So everything's kind of running full speed all the time, and you're just switching it in or out. So everything's perfectly aligned, and that adds with the 96K. The FPGA core allows this, parallel DSP processing really. So there's no latency change ever. That's just fixed. Everything's fixed.
Right.
Everything's solid.
Right. You mentioned the FPGA core. That's one of the things that separates the SQ series from other digital mixers that are out there, is that you guys are using a proprietary FPGA core. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, with the FPGA core, we can build it to exactly what we require. So we're not going, oh, we'll have some DSP chips and plug all these together and then the signal's bouncing around between all the chips. With the XCVI core, you've got tiny, tiny little chip, but actually everything's happening in parallel in there at once. So incredibly powerful, but allows us to build it exactly how we want. We're not subject to somebody else's design or how they see it. It's how we want it to be.
So it really is customized for exactly the application that you have here.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. From right from scratch, really.
Now you have a whole kind of ecosystem that builds around this. Again, does that latency or the 96K factor into all those peripherals that you can attach to this to create a system?
Well, what we've done with the SQ, we've got an S-Link port, we called it on there. We didn't want to leave people who have got our products already and our stage boxes, which are 48K, so a previous generation. We want people to be able to use those still, and still get hold of them if they don't want 96K, for example, as well. But also to be able to use the 96K. So we have upsampling in that S-Link port to allow people to use 96K or 48K, but all the processing is still done at 96K.
I see. So it's backward compatible with the older gear as well.
Yeah, and future-proof.
Awesome. That's great. That's great. So let's kind of summarize here, because again, I've seen a lot of questions on the forum and a lot of theories, if you will, have been thrown out, and I think there's some myths out there about this 96K sample rate and the benefits of that. Can you kind of summarize again? We talked about 3 or 4 different points there that are critical to that. Could you kind of run us through that? Yeah,
sure. So the anti-aliasing, you don't have the issues in the upper frequencies, which you can hear. That's one thing. The transient response is much, much better.
Okay.
The stereo imaging, because of those previous 2 points, is much, much better.
Sure.
So you've got way better stereo imaging.
Right.
And also the latency is much lower, which becomes very important. It's not so important in a recording environment, actually, unless when you're overdubbing maybe, but in a live environment, very, very important.
Right, and in the studio you can compensate in various ways, but in a live performance, a little more difficult to delay some things and to move some things forward. So, so yeah, those really are the key factors, and I think they're the things to keep in mind as you're looking at a mixer and why you would want something that's 96K. I mean, I think everything is going that way anyway, and you guys are obviously leading the charge with the custom FPGA and the work that you've done with the SQ and other mixers. So you're pushing in that direction. So I think it's important then to differentiate this 96K sample rate and the benefits of that from what you get with a digital mixer that's not operating that fast, because it really can be an audible difference even in a club and even in a house of worship.
Absolutely. Some of that comes from the 96K, some of that comes from the XCVI engine, but it really is a night and day difference between the two.
Right, absolutely. Keith, thanks so much for coming in and explaining some of these points for us. It's a deep technology, but I think once you understand what the actual audible differences are, you start to realize how valuable something like 96K can really be.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate you being here. And thank you for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.